Welcome back, gentle traveler, to another peaceful journey through the mystical lore of the Elder Scrolls universe. I'm honored to be your guide once more, as we explore another layer of Tamriel's profound mysteries. This is elderscrollslore to sleep to, where we uncover the rich tapestry of stories that form this beloved world in a way designed to help you relax, unwind, and perhaps drift into peaceful slumber. In our previous journeys together, we've explored the very origins of existence, the eternal dance of Anu and Padome, the sacrifice of the Adra, and the creation of the mortal realm. We witnessed the convention that established time and the emergence of the first beings who would shape the world we know. We've also delved into the enigmatic Elder Scrolls themselves, those artifacts of impossible knowledge that exist both within and beyond time, containing all possible pasts and futures within their shifting patterns. We've walked the quiet halls of the moth priests and contemplated the nature of prophecy in a universe where time branches like a river. Tonight we turn our attention to something that stands in plain sight throughout Tamriel, yet whose true significance remains hidden from most who dwell there: the towers. These monumental structures dot the landscape of Nirn, from the white gold tower at the heart of the imperial city to the imposing red mountain of Morrowind, from the snow-capped peak of the throat of the world to the crystalline spires of Somerset Isle. To the common folk of Tamriel, these are simply impressive landmarks, seats of power, sacred mountains, ancient ruins. A merchant in the imperial city might glance up at White Gold Tower and see merely the center of government, a symbol of imperial authority. A Dunmer pilgrim approaching Red Mountain might perceive only a holy site tied to the history of his people. A Nord gazing at the throat of the world might recognize it as the highest peak in Skyrim, home to the reclusive Greybeards. But these towers are far more than mere buildings or geographical features. In the metaphysics of the Elder Scrolls universe, they serve as the very anchors of reality, the pins that hold the fabric of existence in place, that maintain the stability of the mortal plane against the chaotic forces that would unravel it. They are simultaneously physical structures that can be touched and climbed, and cosmic principles made manifest, embodiments of the fundamental patterns that allow reality to cohere. In this episode, Towers of Power, we will explore these fascinating structures, their origins, their purposes, the stones that power them, and the consequences when they fall. We will uncover the hidden connections between seemingly ordinary landmarks and the very foundations of existence itself, revealing how the geography of Tamriel reflects and embodies the deepest metaphysical principles of its reality. We'll discover how the towers mirror on a grand scale what the Elder Scrolls represent on a more concentrated level, points where the abstract patterns of creation manifest in forms that mortals can perceive and to some extent interact with. We'll learn how these structures relate to the sacrifice of the Adra that we explored in our first episode, and how they connect to the concepts of time and prophecy that we contemplated in our second journey together. As we begin this exploration, I invite you to settle comfortably wherever you are. Perhaps you're lying in bed, ready for sleep, or resting in a quiet place, seeking a moment of peaceful contemplation. Allow your body to find its natural position of ease, releasing any tension you might be holding in your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. Take a few gentle breaths, feeling the rhythmic rise and fall of your chest, letting each exhalation carry away a small portion of the day's concerns. If your mind has been busy with thoughts or worries, know that it's perfectly natural for such mental activity to occur. Just as the towers stand unmoved while storms rage around them, you too can remain centered and peaceful, even as thoughts come and go. There's no need to force your mind into stillness. Simply observe your thoughts without attachment, allowing them to pass like clouds across the sky, while you return your attention gently to the sound of my voice and the stories I'll share. There's no need to actively memorize the information we'll discuss tonight. Like the towers themselves, which stand as silent witnesses to the passing of ages, our exploration is not meant to burden you with details, but to invite you into a deeper appreciation of the patterns that connect all things. So rather than trying to grasp every concept, simply allow the stories and ideas to wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you deeper into relaxation with each moment. As we discuss these ancient structures, you might find your mind creating images of soaring spires reaching toward the heavens, of mountains whose peaks pierce the clouds, of ancient stones humming with power beyond mortal comprehension. Allow these images to form naturally, without effort or strain. Your imagination is the perfect tool for this journey, bridging the gap between waking thought and dreaming vision. The towers we'll explore tonight exist at this same intersection between the physical world that can be touched and measured and the metaphysical principles that give that world meaning and coherence. They remind us that reality itself is perhaps more malleable, more mysterious than our everyday experience suggests, that beneath the apparent solidity of our existence lie patterns of extraordinary complexity and beauty. In a way, the towers represent the very essence of what makes the Elder Scrolls universe so compelling, the seamless blending of the tangible and the transcendent, the way that ordinary landscapes and structures can harbor extraordinary significance, the hidden depths that lie beneath even the most familiar surfaces. They invite us to look at our own world with the same sense of wonder, to consider what deeper patterns might lie beneath the ordinary features of our existence. So now, with calm mind and relaxed body, let us begin our exploration of these remarkable structures, the towers of power that stand as silent guardians of reality throughout the continent of Tamriel and beyond. Let us uncover their secrets, contemplate their significance, and perhaps catch a glimpse of the cosmic architecture that supports the entirety of the mortal plane. Chapter 1: Origins and Purpose of the Towers. To understand the true nature of the towers, we must return to the earliest moments of creation that we explored in our first journey together. After the sacrifice of the Adra had established the mortal plane of Mundus, after the departure of Magnus had torn open the sky to create the sun, the newly formed world existed in a state of profound instability. The boundaries between Mundus and the surrounding realms of Oblivion were tenuous, the laws of nature still malleable, the very fabric of reality not yet fully settled into lasting patterns. In this primordial state, the mortal plane was vulnerable, not just to outside forces that might seek to unmake it, but to its own inherent tendency toward dissolution. The sacrifice of the Adra had created something unprecedented in the cosmos, a realm where limitation itself became the foundation for new forms of existence, where beings could grow and change through the experience of constraints. But this revolutionary experiment remained precarious, a delicate weaving of patterns that could unravel without proper support. The metaphysician Vik, in the obscure text, the 36 Lessons, describes this early state as the Mundex terrene, that is, the land contingent with the world that was of Ada. In this poetic phrasing, we glimpse the fundamental nature of early Mundus, a realm contingent upon the sacrifice of the Ada, the original spirits, yet not fully realized, still hovering between potential and actuality. In such a state, reality itself was more suggestion than fact, more possibility than certainty. It was in this context that the first and most fundamental of all towers came into being, Ada-Mantia, or the Adamantian Tower, standing on a small island in the Iliac Bay, between the provinces of High Rock and Hammerfell. This slender spire of impossible material rose skyward at the site of the convention itself, the cosmic moment when the Aedra gathered to decide the fate of their creation. Unlike the towers that would follow it, Ada-Mantia was not built by mortal hands, or even by the conscious intention of divine beings. It arose spontaneously from the convention itself, a physical manifestation of the metaphysical decision point, where the Aedra committed to their sacrifice. In the language of mystical scholars, Ada-Mantia is not merely a record of the convention, but its continuing embodiment, the moment of creation made permanent, anchored in physical form. The tower's material defies conventional description, appearing as metal but possessing qualities no ordinary metal could claim. It cannot be damaged by any known force, shows no signs of weathering despite standing for untold millennia, and is said to produce subtle harmonic tones that can only be heard by those with the most refined spiritual sensitivity. These tones are described not as sounds in the ordinary sense, but as the audible manifestation of the patterns that govern reality itself, the music of creation made faintly perceptible to mortal senses. Those who have dedicated their lives to studying Ada-Mantia speak of distinct changes in perception that occur as one approaches the tower. Colors seem more vivid, sounds more clear, thoughts more precise. Time itself is said to flow differently in the tower's vicinity, not faster or slower in the conventional sense, but with a peculiar stability, as if each moment exists more fully, more definitely than moments elsewhere. This quality reflects Ada-Mantia's fundamental role as the anchor point, where time itself was established as a linear progression rather than an undifferentiated eternity. At the heart of Ada-Mantia lies its stone, the Zero Stone, also called Convention, which represents perhaps the most fundamental anchor point of reality in the entire Elder Scrolls universe. If the tower is the physical manifestation of the moment of creation, the Zero Stone is the very center of that moment, the fulcrum around which all other events pivot. It exists simultaneously at the precise physical center of the tower and at the metaphysical center of creation itself. The nature of the Zero Stone is perhaps the most closely guarded secret in all of Tamriel. Those few who claim to have glimpsed it describe not a physical object in any conventional sense, but a point where reality itself seems to fold inward, where the distinctions between material and immaterial, between is and is not, somehow collapse. One ancient text describes it as the point that is also whole, the moment that is also eternity, the smallest particle that contains all possible patterns. An obscure Nirn text suggests that the Zero Stone represents what mathematicians would call a singularity, a point where the normal rules that govern physical existence break down, where infinite values can be contained within finite space. This mathematical metaphor perhaps comes closest to capturing the paradoxical nature of the stone, which serves simultaneously as an origin point from which reality expands and a center point that holds it stable. With the establishment of Ada-Mantia, the mortal plane gained its first true anchor, a fixed point that helps stabilize the patterns of reality. But a single anchor, however profound, could not fully secure something as vast and complex as Mundus. The world remained vulnerable, its boundaries still permeable, its fundamental nature still settling into final form. It was the Aldmer, the earliest elven civilization, descendants of the Elmervi, who had been present at the convention itself, who first recognized the need for additional towers. Drawing upon ancestral memories of the convention and their innate sensitivity to metaphysical patterns, they conceived of a remarkable project to create echoes of Ada-Mantia, additional anchor points that would further stabilize the mortal plane and perhaps allow them to shape its final nature in ways that aligned with their own vision of how reality should be structured. The Aldmeri understanding of the towers was captured in an ancient text called the Pendulous Crystal Prism, fragments of which survive in the archives of Alinor. This document speaks of reality as a tension between 8 points of divine possibility, with a ninth at the center. The 8 points correspond to what would become the system of towers, while the ninth, central point, represents Mundus itself. By establishing and maintaining the 8 points in proper relation to each other, the document suggests the central point, the mortal realm, could be sustained indefinitely. Thus was born the concept of the towers as a metaphysical system, a network of structures that would not merely support reality, but define it, that would transform the raw potential of the early Mundus into a stable pattern reflecting specific principles and values. It was an ambition of staggering scope, an attempt to participate in the very architecture of creation itself. The first tower created through conscious intention was Crystal-like Lore, also known simply as Crystal Tower, raised by the Aldmer on the central mountain of Somerset Isle. This gleaming spire of translucent crystal embodied elven ideals of perfection, order, and the transcendence of mortal limitations. Unlike the spontaneous emergence of Ada-Mantia, Crystal-like Lore represented a deliberate act of cosmic architecture, an effort to impose a specific vision upon the still malleable fabric of reality. According to Altmeri traditions, the construction of Crystal-like Lore was guided by a figure known as Sirabane, an ancient mage of such profound insight that he could perceive the underlying patterns of reality. It was Sirabane who determined the precise location, dimensions, and orientation of the tower, ensuring that it would resonate harmoniously with Ada-Mantia across the intervening distance. So revered was Sirabane for this achievement that he was eventually elevated to the Altmeri pantheon, worshipped as the god of magic and guardian of the tower's mysteries. The stone of Crystal-like Lore, called Transparent Lore, was a perfect crystal sphere housed at the very top of the tower. This stone had the remarkable property of existing simultaneously in all planes of existence, not merely Mundus, but also Aetherius, the various realms of Oblivion, and planes not readily accessible to either mortals or Daedra. Through this multi-dimensional presence, Transparent Lore reinforced the boundaries between different planes, while also maintaining pathways of connection between them, ensuring that the mortal realm remained distinct from other planes without becoming completely isolated. With the establishment of Crystal-like Lore, a pattern began to emerge. Each tower would serve as an anchor for reality, but would also embody and reinforce specific metaphysical principles. Ada-Mantia represented the moment of convention, the fundamental decision that established the mortal plane. Crystal-like Lore embodied perfection and multi-dimensional connectivity, reflecting elven ideals of transcending mortal limitations while maintaining order. As the early eras progressed, and the various cultures of Tamriel developed their own distinct identities, additional towers were established, some deliberately constructed, others arising from natural features or historical events of profound significance. Each new tower further stabilized the fabric of reality, while also introducing its own particular influence on the metaphysical patterns of Mundus. Red Mountain, also called Red Tower, arose on the island of Vvardenfell in what would become Morrowind. Unlike the previous towers, Red Mountain was not constructed in the conventional sense, but formed through a remarkable convergence of events. According to Dunmurry tradition, it emerged at the site where the heart of the god Lorkhan fell to earth after being torn from his body by the other Aedra. This origin gives Red Mountain a unique status among the towers, as it embodies not construction but dismemberment, not ascension but the fall of divine essence into material form. The impact of Lorkhan's heart was so tremendous that it reshaped the geography of the region, creating the volcanic mountain and the surrounding landscape of Vvardenfell. The event is recorded in various mythic traditions, including the Dunmurry monomyth, which describes how the world shook with each beat of the heart, and red rivers flowed across the land. This vivid imagery captures the profound disruption caused by the introduction of such a powerful divine artifact into the mortal realm. The stone of Red Mountain is none other than the Heart of Lorkhan itself, the still beating heart of the divine being who, according to some traditions, conceived the very idea of the mortal plane. The heart pulsed with power beyond mortal comprehension, containing within it the boundary-breaking creative impulse that had led to the creation of Mundus in the first place. Its presence within Red Mountain made the volcano not merely an anchor for reality, but a point where the raw creative potential of the divine could be accessed by those with sufficient knowledge and daring. This pattern continued with each new tower: white gold in Cyrodiil, green sap in Valenwood, snowthroat in Skyrim, walkbrass of the Dwemer, orichalc in now-sunken Yokuda, and others whose names and locations have been lost to history or remain known only to the most secretive scholars. Each embodied different principles, anchoring different aspects of reality, contributing in unique ways to the overall stability and character of the mortal plane. White Gold Tower, constructed by the Aelids in the heart of what would become the Imperial City, was explicitly designed to mimic the structure of Ada-Mantia, but with a crucial difference, where the adamantine tower represented stability and conservation. White gold was engineered to harness and direct magical energies on an unprecedented scale. Its design incorporated complex geometric patterns that allowed it to collect and focus magical power from across Cyrodiil, making it both an anchor for reality and a tool for reshaping it according to the Aelid's desires. The metaphysical significance of this system cannot be overstated. Together, the towers form what mystical scholars call the Wheel, a cosmic structure that defines the fundamental nature of reality in the Elder Scrolls universe. The center of this wheel is the mortal plane of Mundus, with the towers serving as the spokes that connect the center to the rim, the boundary that separates Mundus from the surrounding realms of Oblivion. This wheel is not merely a conceptual model, but a genuine metaphysical structure that can be perceived from certain perspectives. The most accomplished mystics, those who achieve a state called Chem, a form of enlightenment in which one simultaneously recognizes the illusory nature of individual existence and yet maintains individual identity, report being able to perceive the wheel directly, to see the cosmic architecture that underlies apparent reality. The mage scholar Septimus Signus, though eventually driven to madness by his studies, left writings that attempt to describe this perception. The circles within circles, spokes arrayed like the sun's rays, the whole turned on its side, so that Mundus forms the axle around which all else revolves. This description, though cryptic, captures something of the dizzying complexity of the wheel as perceived by those who can see beyond ordinary reality. Even more remarkable, some traditions suggest that it is possible to perceive the wheel from a different angle, to see it edge-on rather than face-on, at which point it ceases to appear as a wheel at all, and instead resembles a tower. The tower, the ultimate metaphysical structure that transcends even the system of towers themselves. This perception represents the deepest possible insight into the nature of reality, the recognition that all existence is ultimately a single, unified pattern, rather than a collection of separate elements. The text, The Tower, in the mysterious series, The 36 Lessons of Vivek, alludes to this perception. The tower is an achievement that stands eternal, the first to see the tower, and then the world within it. This cryptic passage suggests that to perceive the tower is to recognize the fundamental unity underlying all apparent diversity, to see the single pattern that gives rise to all manifestations of existence. The practical function of the towers extends beyond their metaphysical role in stabilizing reality. Each tower also serves as a conduit for magical energies, channeling the raw power of creation from Etherius, the realm of magic, into the mortal plane. This channeling creates areas of increased magical potential around each tower, explaining why regions containing towers often develop especially sophisticated magical traditions or produce individuals of extraordinary arcane talent. This channeling function was not merely an accidental byproduct, but an intentional aspect of the tower's design. The ancient Oldmer and the various cultures that followed their example understood that by anchoring reality through the towers, they were not merely preserving the mortal plane, but actively shaping its character. Each tower influences the flow of magical energies in specific ways, creating distinctive patterns that affect everything from the local environment to the forms of magic that flourish in its vicinity. Furthermore, the towers influence the very land around them, shaping environments, weather patterns, and even the flora and fauna of their regions. The lush forests of Valenwood, the volcanic activity of Vardenfell, the harsh climate of Skyrim, all reflect in part the influence of their respective towers, the specific ways in which these structures channel and distribute metaphysical energies. In Valenwood, the tower known as Green Sap manifests not as a single structure, but as a network of ancient trees called the Grat Oaks, with the primary tower tree located in the city of Falanesti. These living towers influence the entire ecology of the region, creating a forest of exceptional vitality and magical potency. Animals in the vicinity of the Grat Oaks display unusual intelligence, plants grow with remarkable speed and resilience, and the very cycles of nature operate according to patterns distinct from those in other provinces. The relationship between the towers and the various cultures of Tamriel is similarly profound. While few ordinary citizens understand the true nature of these structures, cultural traditions often reflect an intuitive recognition of their significance. Sacred rituals, architectural motifs, even patterns of settlement and governance frequently echo the metaphysical principles embodied by the local tower, creating an unconscious harmony between cultural and cosmic patterns. The imperial city, for instance, was designed in a perfect circle around White Gold Tower, with avenues radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel. This design was not merely aesthetic, but reflected an intuitive understanding of how magical energies flow from the tower, creating patterns that could be harnessed for the benefit of the city's inhabitants. Similarly, the major settlements of Morrowind were traditionally arranged in patterns that resonated with Red Mountain, aligning themselves with the flows of power emanating from the Heart of Lorkhan. Yet perhaps the most significant aspect of the towers is their vulnerability. Despite their profound metaphysical importance, despite their role in maintaining the very stability of reality, most towers can be deactivated or destroyed, typically through the removal, corruption, or destruction of their stones. And when a tower falls, it does not merely cease to function as an anchor, it creates a metaphysical wound in reality itself, a point where the fabric of existence grows thin and unstable. The consequences of such deactivation extend far beyond the immediate vicinity of the tower. When a tower falls, the metaphysical patterns it maintained begin to unravel, creating cascading effects that can reshape entire regions. Weather patterns change, magical energies become unstable, the very laws of nature may function differently. In extreme cases, portions of the mortal plane might become temporarily or permanently disconnected from the main fabric of reality, existing in a kind of metaphysical limbo, neither fully part of Mundus nor fully separate from it. Throughout the history of Tamriel, several towers have already fallen. Crystal-like lore was destroyed during the Oblivion crisis at the end of the Third Era, when Daedric forces specifically targeted it, recognizing its metaphysical significance. Red Mountain's status became uncertain after the cataclysmic eruption in the early Fourth Era, which may have disrupted its connection to the Heart of Lorkhan. Orc-Brass, the brass tower created by the Dwemer, was unmade through the events at the Battle of Red Mountain. Orichalk sank beneath the waves, along with Yokuda, in a cataclysm whose causes remain debated by scholars. With each tower that falls, the stability of Mundus grows more precarious. Some mystics warn that if too many towers become deactivated, the mortal plane itself might become unsustainable, collapsing back into the undifferentiated potential from which it emerged, or becoming vulnerable to reshape or conquest by external forces such as the Daedric princes. The degradation of the tower's collective influence may already be manifesting in subtle ways throughout Tamriel. The increasing frequency of planar conjunctions, periods when the boundaries between Mundus and Oblivion grow thin, might reflect the weakening of the metaphysical barriers the towers help maintain. The rise in magical anomalies reported in various provinces could similarly indicate growing instability in the fundamental patterns of reality. Even seemingly mundane phenomena like shifting weather patterns or the appearance of new diseases might be distant consequences of the tower's decline. This concern is not merely academic. Certain factions within the Elder Scrolls universe actively seek the destruction of the towers as part of apocalyptic agendas. Most notorious among these are the Thalmor, the ruling faction of the Aldmeri Dominion, who according to some sources believe that the mortal plane represents a prison that traps divine spirits in limited mortal forms. By their reasoning, the destruction of the towers would lead to the unmaking of Mundus itself, releasing these spirits from their material confinement and restoring a state of pure, unlimited spiritual existence. This belief stems from an alternative interpretation of the creation myth, in which Lorkhan is seen not as a visionary who conceived of the mortal plane as an opportunity for new forms of growth and experience, but as a trickster who deceived the other divine beings into sacrificing themselves, trapping portions of their essence in material form. From this perspective, the entire project of Mundus represents a cosmic error that the destruction of the towers would correct, allowing the fragmented divine spirits to return to their original, unfettered state. Whether such an outcome is possible, let alone desirable, remains one of the great metaphysical questions in Elder Scrolls lore. What is certain is that the towers represent one of the most profound and far-reaching conceptual frameworks in this fictional universe, a system that elegantly connects physical geography, cultural history, metaphysical principles, and the very fabric of reality itself into a coherent pattern of extraordinary depth and resonance. As we prepare to explore each tower in greater detail, let us carry with us this understanding of their collective significance, not merely as impressive landmarks or centers of power, but as the very architecture that sustains the world of Tamriel, the physical embodiment of the metaphysical principles that allow reality itself to exist and endure. In our next chapter, we will focus on the first and most fundamental of these structures, Ada-Mantia, the adamantine tower, the primordial anchor that emerged from the convention itself, establishing the patterns that all other towers would follow. Chapter 2: Ada-Mantia and the Stability of Time. Standing upon the Isle of Balfiera in the Iliac Bay, rising like a silver needle against the sky, Ada-Mantia, the Adamantian tower, represents the oldest structure in all of Tamriel. Unlike all other towers that would follow, it was not built by mortal hands, nor even consciously designed by divine will. It emerged spontaneously at the moment of convention, the cosmic gathering, where the Idra decided the fate of their creation and established the fundamental laws that would govern the mortal plane. The appearance of Ada-Mantia is both simple and impossible, a slender spire of seamless material that appears metallic but possesses qualities unlike any metal known to the craftsmen of Tamriel. It reflects light in subtle, shifting patterns that seem to change depending on the angle of observation and the state of mind of the observer. Those with magical sensitivity report that the tower seems to hum with a frequency just below the threshold of ordinary hearing, a vibration that resonates with the very rhythms of existence. In the traditional cosmology of the Aldmer, Ada-Mantia represents the physical manifestation of what they call the first law, the establishment of linear time. Before the convention, time as mortals understand it did not exist. Events did not necessarily proceed in sequence. Cause did not necessarily precede effect. Past, present, and future were meaningless distinctions in a reality where all possibilities existed simultaneously. It was the decision of the Idra, made manifest through the convention at Ada-Mantia, that imposed the structure of linear time upon the nascent realm of Mundus. This connection between Ada-Mantia and time itself is reflected in the unusual temporal phenomena reported in the tower's vicinity. Scholars who have studied these effects describe a curious sensation of heightened presence, as if each moment becomes more fully itself, more definite and complete within the tower's influence. Some report experiencing memories with unusual clarity, not merely recalling past events, but seemingly reliving them with all the immediacy of present experience. Others describe prophetic dreams of remarkable specificity while sleeping near the tower, as if its stabilizing effect on time allows for clearer perception of potential futures. The interior of Ada-Mantia is largely unknown to the general population of Tamriel. Access to the tower has been restricted throughout most of history, controlled by various groups who recognized its metaphysical significance. During the First Era, it was primarily the domain of the Nirn clan, a family of Altmer mages who established a hegemony throughout High Rock and maintained strict control over who could enter the tower. In later eras, as the Nirn influence waned, various imperial Breton, and Aldmeri factions have claimed authority over the site, though none have ever fully understood its true nature. Those few accounts that describe the tower's interior speak of chambers that seem to reconfigure themselves, of passageways that appear and disappear, of spaces that seem larger inside than their external dimensions would allow. These spatial anomalies likely reflect the tower's nature as a point where metaphysical principles manifest in physical form, where the conventional laws that govern space become malleable. At the very heart of Ada-Mantia lies the Zero Stone, perhaps the most enigmatic artifact in all of Tamriel. Unlike the stones of other towers, which typically take the form of physical objects, however extraordinary, the Zero Stone exists at the boundary between physical and metaphysical reality. Those who claim to have glimpsed it describe not an object in the conventional sense, but a point where reality itself seems to both originate and terminate, a singularity that defies description in ordinary language. The Zero Stone represents what mystical scholars call convention, not merely the historical event where the Aedra gathered, but the ongoing metaphysical principle that establishes and maintains the basic patterns of reality. It is simultaneously the first moment of creation made permanent and the continuing foundation upon which all subsequent moments rest. Through its presence, the linear progression of time is anchored and sustained, allowing for the coherent unfolding of cause and effect that characterizes mortal experience. The practical significance of Ada-Mantia extends beyond its metaphysical role. Throughout history, the tower has served as a place of power, a strategic stronghold, and a center of magical research. The Direni hegemony, which dominated much of northwestern Tamriel during the early First Era, derived much of its power from its control of the tower and the unique magical knowledge available there. Later, various imperial expeditions sought to unravel the tower's secrets, though with limited success. Even in the Fourth Era, when many of the other towers have fallen or become dormant, Ada-Mantia remains active and influential. Of all the towers, it is considered the most stable and secure, the least vulnerable to deactivation or destruction. This durability stems from its unique origin, where other towers were created through intention and design. Ada-Mantia arose directly from the convention itself, making it an intrinsic part of reality's foundation, rather than an addition to it. The influence of Ada-Mantia extends across Tamriel, though in increasingly subtle ways with distance. Its primary metaphysical contribution, the establishment and maintenance of linear time, affects the entire mortal plane, but other effects are more localized, creating a gradient of influence that is strongest in the Iliac Bay region and gradually diminishes across Tamriel. The cultures of High Rock and Hammerfell, which have developed in closest proximity to the tower, show particular emphasis on traditions related to prophecy, ancestry, and the preservation of historical knowledge, all reflections of Ada-Mantia's temporal influence. Perhaps the most significant aspect of Ada-Mantia, in terms of the overall system of towers, is its role as the template upon which all subsequent towers were modeled. Each tower that followed attempted, in its own way, to replicate the stabilizing function of the first tower, while introducing variations that reflected the specific cultural values and metaphysical understanding of its creators. In this sense, the entire system of towers represents an extended meditation on the principles embodied by Ada-Mantia, a series of variations on the theme it established. Let us now turn our attention to the second tower chronologically, and the first to be consciously created, crystal-like lore, the Tower of the Aldmer on the Isle of Somerset. Unlike the spontaneous emergence of Ada-Mantia, crystal-like lore was deliberately designed and constructed by the early Aldmer civilization. Rising from the highest peak of Eternia in the center of Somerset Isle, the tower took the form of a massive spire of magically crystallized material that shimmered with inner light. Its design reflected the Aldmeri aesthetic of geometric perfection, with precise proportions and angles believed to capture specific metaphysical harmonies. The construction of crystal-like lore represented not merely an architectural achievement, but a profound magical and metaphysical operation. According to Aldmeri records, the tower was raised through a combination of conventional building techniques and grand-scale magical rituals that transformed ordinary materials into the extraordinary crystalline substance of the tower. These rituals reportedly involved thousands of mages working in perfect coordination over a period of years, channeling energies drawn from Aetherius through patterns modeled on those observed in Ada-Mantia. What made crystal-like lore unique among the towers was its stone, known as transparent lore. This perfectly clear crystal sphere, housed at the very top of the tower, possessed the remarkable property of existing simultaneously in multiple planes of reality. Through this multi-dimensional presence, crystal-like lore served not merely to anchor reality, but to establish and maintain connections between different planes of existence, particularly between Mundus and Aetherius. This function reflected the Aldmeri preoccupation with transcendence and return. Unlike humans, who generally adapted well to mortal existence, the elven races, particularly the Aldmer, maintained a sense of exile from their spiritual origins. They viewed the mortal plane not as a home, but as a temporary condition, a state of limitation from which they sought eventually to escape. Crystal-like lore, with its connections to other planes, represented both a reminder of their spiritual heritage and a potential pathway back to it. The tower served as the center of Aldmeri culture and magical study for thousands of years. The chambers within contained some of the most ancient records in Tamriel, repositories of knowledge dating back to the earliest days of elven civilization. Generations of mages and scholars studied within its walls, developing the sophisticated magical traditions that would eventually spread throughout Tamriel through the various branches of elven culture. Sadly, crystal-like lore was destroyed during the Oblivion crisis. At the end of the Third Era, Daedric forces targeted the tower specifically, recognizing its metaphysical significance, and succeeded in shattering transparent lore. With its stone destroyed, the tower collapsed both physically and metaphysically, creating a wound in reality that continues to affect Somerset Isle in subtle ways. The full consequences of this loss may not be fully understood for centuries to come. Moving eastward across Tamriel, we come to one of the most unusual towers, Red Mountain, also called Red Tower, in the province of Morrowind. Unlike the previous towers we have discussed, Red Mountain was not consciously constructed, but arose from a cataclysmic event, the fall of Lorkhan's heart to Nirn, after it was torn from his body by the other Aedra. The impact of the heart created the massive volcanic mountain that dominates the island of Vardenfell, a physical manifestation of divine violence and sacrificial dismemberment. Where Ada-Mantia represents the decision of the convention and crystal-like lore, embodies elven aspirations toward perfection and transcendence, Red Mountain embodies something darker and more primal, the consequences of limitation, the pain of division, the raw creative power that emerges from destruction. The stone of Red Mountain is the Heart of Lorkhan itself, a divine artifact of almost unimaginable power. Unlike the stones of other towers, which generally serve primarily to anchor metaphysical principles. The heart actively radiates creative energy. It is, in a very real sense, a fragment of the divine force that conceived the very idea of the mortal plane, still pulsing with the original creative impulse that led to the creation of Mundus. This unique nature made Red Mountain not merely a passive anchor for reality, but an active source of transformative power. Those who could access the heart, as the Dwemer attempted and the tribunal temporarily succeeded in doing, could channel its divine energies to reshape reality according to their will. This potential made Red Mountain both profoundly important to the metaphysical stability of Tamriel and dangerously vulnerable to misuse. The cultures that developed around Red Mountain reflect its distinctive character. The Dunmer, who built their civilization in its shadow, created religious and social structures that acknowledged both the creative and destructive aspects of existence. Their veneration of the tribunal, mortals who achieved godhood through the power of the heart, and their traditions of ancestor worship both reflect attempts to reconcile mortality and divinity, limitation and transcendence, in ways that echo the paradoxical nature of Red Mountain itself. The status of Red Mountain as a tower became uncertain following the events at the end of the Third Era, when the Nerevarine fulfilled ancient prophecies and released the heart from its bindings. While the physical mountain remains, its metaphysical role may have been significantly altered by the heart's liberation. Some scholars suggest that the subsequent eruption in the early Fourth Era represented a final severing of the tower's connection to its stone, while others argue that the heart's influence continues in more subtle forms, perhaps through its long association with the land itself. Continuing our journey westward, we arrive at White Gold Tower, the central structure of the imperial city in Cyrodiil. This tower represents perhaps the most deliberate attempt to replicate the metaphysical function of Ada-Mantia while adapting it to serve the specific magical and political purposes of its creators, the Eyelids. White gold stands at the center of a perfect circle formed by the imperial city, with 8 major districts arranged around it, like the spokes of a wheel. This design is no accident, but reflects the tower's metaphysical function. It serves as the hub of a wheel-like structure that collects and focuses magical energies from across Cyrodiil. The 8 spokes correspond to the 8 major forms of magic recognized in Tamrielic tradition, creating a comprehensive magical system anchored by the tower at its center. The construction of White Gold Tower was a monumental undertaking, combining advanced architecture, complex magical engineering, and metaphysical insights drawn from the Eyelids' study of Ada-Mantia. The tower was built not merely of stone, but of a magically treated material that resonates with specific frequencies of magical energy, allowing it to serve as both a collector and a transmitter of arcane power. The stone of White Gold Tower is the Chimel Adabol, also known as the Amulet of Kings, a large ruby-like gem believed to contain the soul of a dragon, symbolically representing Akatosh, the god of time. This connection to Akatosh creates a metaphysical link between White Gold and Ada-Mantia, as both towers share a connection to the divine force that governs time itself. But where Ada-Mantia established time as a linear progression, White Gold's influence is more subtle and flexible, creating possibilities for manipulating temporal flows within the broader framework of linear time. This flexibility was exploited to tremendous effect by the Eyelids, who used white gold as the centerpiece of a magical system that allowed them to bend reality according to their desires. They created pockets of altered time, spaces where the normal laws of nature were modified or suspended, and channels through which they could draw power directly from Etherius. The result was a civilization of extraordinary magical sophistication, capable of feats that later cultures could barely comprehend, let alone replicate. When the Alessian rebels overthrew the Allied hegemony, they took control of White Gold Tower, but lacked the knowledge to fully utilize its capabilities. The Amulet of Kings became primarily a symbol of imperial legitimacy and a tool for maintaining the barriers between Mundus and Oblivion, rather than the centerpiece of an integrated magical system. Nevertheless, the tower continued to exert its metaphysical influence, shaping the development of the various imperial cultures that controlled it over the millennia. The destruction of the Amulet of Kings at the end of the Third Era, during the resolution of the Oblivion crisis, appears to have deactivated White Gold Tower as a metaphysical structure, though it remains standing physically. The full consequences of this deactivation continue to unfold, contributing to the general instability of the Fourth Era. Moving northward, we come to Snowthroat, the tower associated with Skyrim. Unlike most other towers, which take the form of constructed spires, Snowthroat is a natural formation, the throat of the world, the tallest mountain in Tamriel. This connection to the natural world reflects the Atmaran Nordic tradition from which it emerged, with its emphasis on the raw power of nature rather than the refined artifice preferred by elven cultures. The exact circumstances of Snowthroat's designation as a tower are somewhat mysterious. Unlike the deliberate construction of crystal-like lore or white gold, Snowthroat appears to have been recognized rather than created, identified as a natural manifestation of tower-like properties, and then consecrated or activated through rituals whose details have been lost to history. Ancient Nordic texts make enigmatic references to the Snow Tower and its role in anchoring the north, but provide few specific details about how this anchoring function operates. Even more enigmatic is the identity of Snowthroat's stone. Various possibilities have been suggested by scholars. The time wound created by the use of an elder scroll against Alduin, the peak of the mountain itself, the Skyforge in Whiterun, or some unknown artifact hidden within the mountain. This uncertainty may reflect the decentralized nature of ancient Nordic culture, which lacked the unified magical traditions of the elven civilizations, and thus approached the concept of the towers in a more intuitive, less systematic way. Whatever its precise nature, Snowthroat appears to embody principles of endurance, survival, and adaptation, themes central to Nordic culture, with its emphasis on thriving in harsh conditions and preserving strength through adversity. The tower's influence likely contributes to the remarkable resilience of Nordic traditions, which have persisted through countless invasions, migrations, and political transformations, with their essential character intact. The status of Snowthroat as an active tower in the Fourth Era is uncertain. Some interpretations of prophecy suggest that it has become sundered, kingless, bleeding, potentially indicating a deactivation similar to that of other towers. Others argue that the resolution of Skyrim's civil war, regardless of which faction prevails, might represent a restoration of the tower's stability. The ambiguity reflects the generally unsettled metaphysical state of Tamriel during this period, as the system of towers that has maintained reality for millennia continues to erode. Let us now consider one of the most unusual towers, Green Sap, associated with Valenwood and the Bosma culture. Unlike other towers, which are typically singular structures, Green Sap manifests as a network of ancient trees, known as the Great Oaks. with one central tree traditionally located in the city of Falanesti, serving as the primary tower. This distributed nature reflects the Bosmeri worldview with its emphasis on interconnection and symbiosis rather than hierarchy and centralization. Where other cultures conceived of towers as singular spires reaching toward the heavens, the Bosmer envisioned their tower as a living network embedded within the forest itself, drawing power from the land and returning it in a continuous cycle of exchange. The stone of green sap is traditionally identified as the perchance acorn, a seed of potentially infinite possibilities that contains within itself all the forms the forest might take. This conceptualization aligns with the Bosmeri understanding of form as fluid and contingent rather than fixed and definite, a perspective embodied in their notorious wild hunt ritual, in which Bosmer transformed themselves into monstrous, shape-shifting entities. Greensap's influence manifests primarily through the extraordinary vitality and magical potency of Valenwood's forests. Plants grow with unusual speed and resilience. Animals display heightened intelligence and sensitivity, and the boundaries between different forms of life become more permeable than elsewhere in Tamriel. The seasonal movement of Falanesti, the walking city built around the central grotto, represents perhaps the most dramatic expression of this fluid approach to form and structure. The current status of green sap is difficult to determine. The cessation of Falanesti's seasonal migrations in the late Third Era suggests a potential disruption of the tower's function, but the distributed nature of green sap means that even significant changes to one component might not deactivate the entire system. The Bosmer themselves seem uncertain about the tower's status, with different tribal traditions offering conflicting interpretations of recent events. Our exploration of individual towers would be incomplete without mentioning Walkbrass, also known as the Brass Tower or Numidium, the artificial god constructed by the Dwemer. Unlike other towers, which primarily serve to anchor and stabilize reality, Walkbrass was designed as a mobile construct, a walking tower that could actively reshape reality according to the will of its controllers. The ambition behind Walkbrass exceeded even the grand magical projects of the Aelides or Altmer. The Dwemer sought not merely to anchor or influence reality, but to create a new god, a being that could transcend the limitations of the existing metaphysical framework. Using the Heart of Lorkhan as its power source, they built a colossal brass construct that embodied their philosophical rejection of traditional divinity and their belief in the supremacy of reason and science over myth and spirit. The Stone of Walkbrass was originally the Heart of Lorkhan, the same divine artifact that powered Red Mountain. This dual use of the heart created a unique metaphysical situation, two towers drawing power from the same stone, creating resonances and tensions between them that likely contributed to the extraordinary events surrounding the Battle of Red Mountain and the disappearance of the Dwemer. After the disappearance of the Dwemer, Walkbrass remained dormant for centuries, until Tiber Septim's forces discovered it and commissioned the construction of a replacement power source, the Mantella, a soul gem containing the life essence of the Underking. Powered by this new stone, Walkbrass became the instrument through which Tiber Septim completed his conquest of Tamriel, using the construct's reality warping powers to overcome otherwise insurmountable obstacles. The subsequent activation of Walkbrass during the events known as the Warp in the West led to one of the most significant dragon breaks in recent history, a fracturing of linear time that allowed multiple contradictory outcomes to occur simultaneously. This event demonstrated the tremendous metaphysical implications of manipulating a tower-level structure and the dangers inherent in attempting to use such structures for narrow political or military purposes. The current whereabouts and status of Walkbrass are unknown, though rumors persist that various factions seek to recover and reactivate it. Given its demonstrated ability to create dragon breaks and fundamentally alter reality, such attempts could have profound consequences for the already precarious metaphysical stability of Tamriel. As we conclude our survey of individual towers, it becomes apparent that each represents not merely a physical structure, but a philosophical statement, a concrete embodiment of how different cultures understand reality and their place within it. From the temporal stability of Ada-Mantia to the transcendent aspirations of crystal-like lore, from the creative destructive power of Red Mountain to the fluid vitality of Green Sap, each tower gives physical form to a distinct vision of what reality is and what it might become. In the next chapter, we will explore the consequences of the gradual deactivation of this system of towers, examining how the metaphysical architecture that has supported Tamriel for millennia is slowly eroding, and what this erosion might mean for the future of the mortal plane. Chapter 3. The consequences of deactivated towers. Throughout the long history of Tamriel, the network of towers has stood as the metaphysical infrastructure supporting reality itself, maintaining the stability of the mortal plane and defining its fundamental nature. Each tower, with its unique stone, has contributed to this collective function while also shaping its local region according to specific principles and energies. But this system, developed over thousands of years, has begun to erode tower by tower. The great anchors of reality have been deactivated or destroyed, creating a gradual but profound shift in the metaphysical landscape of Nirn. To understand the significance of this erosion, we must first consider what it means for a tower to fall. In most cases, a tower falls not through physical destruction, though that may occur as well, but through the deactivation, corruption, or removal of its stone. The tower structure itself may remain standing, but without its active stone, it ceases to function as a metaphysical anchor. Its energy no longer flows into the surrounding region. Its stabilizing influence on reality diminishes and eventually ceases entirely. The metaphysician Baladas Demnavani, in his obscure texts Wheels and Spokes, describes a fallen tower as a body without a heart, a form without essence, physically present but metaphysically hollow. This evocative image captures something essential about deactivated towers. They become shells of their former selves, monuments to what once was, rather than active participants in the ongoing maintenance of reality. Their presence on the landscape serves as a reminder of the metaphysical architecture that once supported the mortal plane, even as that architecture gradually crumbles. The first major tower to fall in recorded history was likely Orichalk, the Tower of Yokuda, a continent to the west of Tamriel that sank beneath the waves in the late First Era. The exact circumstances of this catastrophe remain shrouded in mystery and conflicting accounts. Some traditions attribute it to natural disaster, while others speak of a forbidden sword technique called Pancrator sword that somehow cut the atomos, a phrase that suggests the sundering of fundamental reality itself. Yokudan records that survived the cataclysm describe Orichalk as a golden spire that reflected the sun even at midnight and served as the focal point for an advanced civilization whose metalworking and sword techniques exceeded anything known in Tamriel. The tower's stone is variously described as a pearl that contained the memory of the world before the world, or a sphere of singing metal that taught the first sword singers their arts. These poetic descriptions suggest a stone connected to ancestral memory and the transmission of cultural knowledge, themes that would remain central to Redguard culture even after their displacement to Hammerfell. Whatever the specific cause, the sinking of Yokeda and the presumed destruction of Orichalk Tower created ripples across Nirn's metaphysical fabric. Those sensitive to such matters reported disturbances in magical fields, unusual astronomical phenomena, and brief but significant alterations in the properties of various materials. These effects eventually subsided as the remaining towers compensated for the loss, redistributing the burden of reality's maintenance among themselves. The refugees who fled Yokuda to settle in Hammerfell brought with them fragments of knowledge about their lost tower, preserved in the cryptic verses of sword singers and the architectural principles of their earliest settlements. These cultural remnants suggest that Orichalk embodied principles of transformation through adversity, of strength forged through resistance, themes that would continue to characterize Redguard culture even after their displacement to Tamriel. In the grand halls of Sentinel Palace, there stands a small model of what scholars believe represents Orichalk Tower, a spiraling structure of interlocking golden bands that creates different patterns when viewed from different angles. This architectural principle, replicated in various forms throughout traditional Redguard buildings, may reflect something essential about how Orichalk functioned as a tower, perhaps embodying the idea that truth changes depending on perspective while remaining fundamentally consistent. The next significant tower to fall was Walkbrass, the brass tower created by the Dwemer. The circumstances of its deactivation are complex and still not fully understood, involving the disappearance of the entire Dwemer race during the Battle of Red Mountain in 1E 700. What is known is that the Dwemer chief engineer Kagranak attempted to use tools he had created to harness the power of the Heart of Lorkhan, which served as Walkbrass's stone. The precise nature of his attempt and what exactly went wrong remain subjects of scholarly debate, but the outcome is clear. The Dwemer vanished entirely from Nirn, and their artificial god was rendered dormant. Analyses of Dwemer texts recovered from various ruins suggest that Walkbrass was designed to function differently from other towers. Where most towers served primarily to anchor and stabilize reality, Walkbrass was conceived as a tool for actively reshaping it. Kagranak's journals speak of refuting the lies of the world and rewriting the errors of creation, phrases that hint at the Dwemer's ambition to fundamentally alter the nature of existence, rather than merely reinforce its existing patterns. The metaphysical consequences of this event were profound and far-reaching. The sudden deactivation of a tower as powerful and unique as Walkbrass, coupled with the simultaneous disappearance of an entire civilization, created a shockwave through the fabric of reality that manifested in various ways across Tamriel. Weather patterns shifted dramatically, magical energies became temporarily unpredictable, the boundaries between different planes of existence grew momentarily thin, allowing for increased Daedric activity. Farmer legends preserved by the Snow Elves, who sought refuge with the Dwemer, speak of the day the earth refused its name, when stone became not stone, water became not water, and fire burned cold, while ice burned hot. These poetic descriptions capture something of the fundamental disorientation that followed the fall of Walkbrass, a temporary but profound disruption in the basic properties of matter itself, as reality adjusted to the sudden absence of one of its key anchors. More subtly, the fall of Orc may have contributed to a general diminishment of technological potential across Nirn. The Dwemer had represented the pinnacle of technological achievement in Tamriel, pioneering approaches to metallurgy, mechanics, and the integration of magic with physical principles that no other culture had matched. With their disappearance and the deactivation of their tower, something essential seemed to fade from the collective knowledge of Tamriel's races. Later civilizations would study Dwemer ruins and artifacts, but never fully recapture the innovative spirit that had animated their creators. This technological regression may indicate something profound about the relationship between towers and the forms of knowledge possible within their influence. Each tower shapes not just the physical environment around it, but the intellectual and creative environment as well, making certain ideas more thinkable, certain innovations more discoverable. When a tower falls, the patterns of thought had become more difficult to access or sustain, leading to the gradual loss of entire fields of knowledge and practice. Orc brass experienced a brief reactivation during the late Second Era, when Tiber Septim's forces used it, powered by the Mantella instead of the Heart of Lorkhan, to complete the conquest of Tamriel. This reactivation culminated in the events of the Warp in the West, a dragon break that allowed multiple contradictory outcomes to occur simultaneously before resolving into a new composite reality. The metaphysical strain of this event, combined with the already compromised state of the tower system, likely contributed to the increasing instability that would characterize the following eras. The Warp in the West deserves particular attention as an illustration of what can happen when tower energies are improperly channeled or controlled. For 3 days, by conventional reckoning, the Iliac Bay region experienced a collapse of linear time, with multiple mutually exclusive events occurring simultaneously. Different political factions gained control of the same territories, individuals died and yet continued to live. Causes followed effects rather than preceding them. When linear time reasserted itself, reality had been fundamentally altered, with dozens of small kingdoms compressed into just 4 major powers, and various individuals retaining fragmentary, contradictory memories of what had occurred. This extreme manifestation of metaphysical instability demonstrates the risks involved in manipulating tower-level energies without full understanding of their nature and function. The towers were designed to maintain the stability of reality, not to serve as tools for achieving narrow political or military objectives. When repurposed in this way, they tend to produce outcomes far beyond what their users intended or could predict, sometimes with catastrophic consequences for the fabric of reality itself. The Third Era saw the deactivation of 2 more major towers, further compromising the metaphysical stability of Nirn. Red Mountain's status as an active tower became uncertain following the events at the end of the era, when the Nirn released the Heart of Lorkhan from its bindings beneath the mountain. Without its stone, Red Mountain's metaphysical function was severely compromised, though the physical volcano remained and would later erupt with devastating consequences for Morrowind. The release of the heart represents an unusual case in the history of tower deactivations. Unlike most instances where the stone is destroyed or corrupted, the Heart of Lorkhan was deliberately freed from its constraints by the actions of the Nirn. Some metaphysicians argue that this distinction is significant, that the heart's release represents not the destruction of a tower, but its transformation, with the heart continuing to influence reality, but in a more distributed, less localized way than before. This interpretation gains support from certain Ashlander traditions that speak of the heart as the drum that beats throughout all creation. According to these traditions, the heart was never truly confined to Red Mountain, but merely focused there, with its rhythms permeating the entirety of the mortal plane. If this understanding is correct, then the events at Red Mountain may have changed how the heart's power manifests, rather than removing that power entirely from the metaphysical equations that sustain reality. The effects of Red Mountain's deactivation were particularly severe for the Dunmer people, whose culture and even physiology had been shaped by proximity to the tower and its stone. The tribunal, mortal gods, who had drawn power from the heart for thousands of years, lost their divinity. Magical practices, based on the unique energies emanating from Red Mountain, became unreliable or ceased to function entirely. Even the land itself seemed to respond to the tower's fall, becoming increasingly hostile and volcanically active, as if the stabilizing influence that had contained and directed the mountain's volatile energies had suddenly been removed. The Dunmermeri response to this metaphysical catastrophe illustrates how cultures adapt to the fall of their local tower. Rather than abandoning their traditions entirely, the Dunmer reinterpreted them, shifting from the worship of the tribunal to a revitalized veneration of the Daedric prince Azura and other ancestral figures. Their magical practices evolved, finding new sources of power and developing new techniques to replace those that no longer functioned. Even their settlements adapted, with new architectural forms emerging that responded to the changed metaphysical conditions of their homeland. Almost simultaneously with the troubles at Red Mountain, crystal-like lore fell during the Oblivion crisis. Daedric forces specifically targeted the tower, suggesting they recognized its metaphysical significance and deliberately sought to further destabilize the mortal plane by destroying one of its principal anchors. The destruction of crystal-like lore and its stone, transparent lore, severed one of the primary connections between Mundus and Aetherius, disrupting the flow of magical energy and weakening the barriers between different planes of existence. Eyewitness accounts from survivors of the attack describe the tower's destruction in terms that suggest more than mere physical demolition. One Outmer mage wrote of the sound of reality tearing and colors that had no right to exist, flooding the sky as the tower fell. Another described how time itself seemed to stutter and skip in the moments following the destruction of transparent lore. These reports indicate a metaphysical cataclysm extending far beyond the physical damage to the structure itself, a fundamental disruption in the patterns that defined reality in the region. For the Altmer, the fall of their tower represented both a practical and a symbolic catastrophe. Practically, they lost a significant source of magical power and a repository of ancient knowledge that had been accumulated over thousands of years. Symbolically, the destruction of crystal-like lore represented the severing of their most direct connection to their spiritual heritage, a loss that likely contributed to the rise of extremist factions like the Thalmor, who promised to restore that lost connection through radical means. The Thalmor response to the fall of crystal-like lore represents one potential reaction to tower deactivation, an attempt to compensate for the loss by seeking greater control over the remaining metaphysical structures of reality. Where the Dunmer adapted to their changed circumstances through cultural and magical evolution, the Thalmor have pursued a more aggressive agenda, seeking to reshape reality according to their vision, rather than adapting to its altered state. This difference illustrates the range of possible responses to metaphysical disruption, from acceptance and adaptation to resistance and attempted dominance. The end of the Third Era also saw the deactivation of White Gold Tower, when Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings, the tower's stone, to seal the barriers between Mundus and Oblivion. permanently. Unlike the violent destruction of crystal-like lore, or the release of the Heart of Lorkhan, this deactivation was a deliberate sacrifice intended to serve a greater good. Nevertheless, the metaphysical consequences were significant, as one of the central towers in the system ceased to function as an anchor for reality. The circumstances of White Gold's deactivation highlight an important aspect of tower metaphysics, the concept of intentionality and sacrifice. Martin Septim's actions represented a conscious decision to transform the tower's energy rather than simply allowing it to dissipate. By redirecting the power contained within the Amulet of Kings toward the specific purpose of sealing the barriers to oblivion, he ensured that at least some of the tower's function would continue, albeit in a more specialized form than before. This transformation of White Gold's purpose may have mitigated some of the potentially catastrophic consequences of its deactivation, rather than creating a complete metaphysical void in the heart of Tamriel. The tower's energy was channeled into a new pattern, less comprehensive than before, but still contributing to the stability of the mortal plane by reinforcing a specific aspect of its metaphysical architecture. This partial preservation of function may explain why the fall of White Gold, while significant, did not produce the same level of immediate catastrophe as the destruction of crystal-like lore or the disruption at Red Mountain. The timing of these multiple deactivations, 3 major towers falling within a very short span of time, created a period of unprecedented metaphysical instability. The remaining towers struggled to compensate, redistributing the burden of maintaining reality. But the system as a whole was significantly compromised. This instability likely contributed to many of the crises that would characterize the early Fourth Era: natural disasters, political upheavals, the rise of extremist factions, and increased activity from normally dormant threats. Mages across Tamriel reported unusual phenomena in the wake of these multiple deactivations. Spells that had functioned reliably for centuries suddenly produced unpredictable results. Magical boundaries that had contained dangerous forces began to weaken. Artifacts that had lain dormant for ages spontaneously activated. These arcane disruptions reflected the broader metaphysical instability caused by the weakening of the tower system, as the patterns that had defined and limited magical practice for millennia began to shift and dissolve. By the time of the Dragon Crisis in the Fourth Era, the status of the tower system had become increasingly precarious. Ada-Mantia remained active, serving as the primary anchor for reality. Snowthroat in Skyrim and Green Sap in Valenwood remained at least partially functional, though both showed signs of strain or compromise. The other major towers, crystal-like lore, Red Mountain, White Gold, and Walk Brass, had all been deactivated or destroyed. It is perhaps no coincidence that dragons, beings intimately connected with the deepest patterns of time and reality, chose this moment to return to Tamriel in force. The weakening of the tower system may have created conditions that allowed for their reemergence, as the rigid structures that had defined reality became more fluid and permeable to forces that had been excluded or contained during more stable periods. The appearance of Alduin, the World Eater, seems particularly significant in this context, as his mythic role involves the ending of Kalpa cycles, cosmic periods that culminate in the dissolution and renewal of reality itself. This diminished state of the tower system has profound implications for the future of Nirn, with fewer active anchors maintaining the stability of the mortal plane. Reality itself has become increasingly malleable, susceptible to significant alteration through sufficient application of will or power. The barriers between different planes of existence have grown thinner, allowing for increased influence from external forces such as the Daedric princes. Even the basic laws of nature have become somewhat less rigid, creating possibilities for phenomena that would have been impossible in earlier eras. The practical manifestations of this increasing metaphysical fluidity can be observed in various phenomena across Tamriel. Weather patterns have become more extreme and unpredictable, with storms of unprecedented intensity and unusual magical properties appearing with increasing frequency. Geographical features that had remained stable for millennia have begun to shift and change, with new mountains rising, lakes disappearing, and in some cases, entire regions transforming their fundamental character over relatively short periods. Magical anomalies have become more common and more dramatic. Spontaneous conjunctions between planes, previously rare and short-lived, now occur with troubling regularity and may persist for extended periods. Spirits and entities that were once bound by strict metaphysical rules now find those constraints loosened, allowing them to manifest in ways and places previously impossible. Even the boundaries between different schools of magic have begun to blur, with practitioners discovering new techniques that combine elements from traditions that were once considered entirely separate. Some scholars and mystics interpret these changes through an apocalyptic lens, seeing the gradual deactivation of the towers as a prelude to the end of the current kalpa, the cosmic cycle that encompasses the creation, existence, and eventual dissolution of the mortal plane. In this view, the erosion of the tower system represents the beginning of the dissolution phase, a gradual unwinding of the patterns established during the Dawn era that will eventually lead to a reset of reality itself. This apocalyptic interpretation finds support in various prophetic traditions across Tamriel. Nordic end-time myths speak of the final winter, when the wheel breaks and the tower falls. Redguard tales describe a time when the serpent devours all shores, after the pillars of the world are cast down. Even Khajiiti legends tell of the unmaking of the lattice that will precede the next dancing place of Azura. These diverse cultural expressions may all refer to the same fundamental event, the collapse of the tower system and the unraveling of reality that follows. Others take a more nuanced view, suggesting that the weakening of the tower system represents not an end, but a transition, a shift from one metaphysical paradigm to another. By this interpretation, the original system of towers was designed for a younger, more vulnerable mundus that required rigid structure and extensive anchoring. As the mortal plane has matured, it may have developed internal sources of stability that reduce its dependence on external anchors, allowing for greater flexibility and dynamism without risking complete dissolution. The scholar Maurian Zenas proposed in his treatise on metaphysical evolution that creation must eventually outgrow its cradle. He suggested that the tower system represented a necessary support structure for the early development of the mortal plane, but that the ultimate purpose of this system was to eventually become unnecessary, to foster the emergence of a reality that could sustain itself through its own internal patterns, rather than requiring external anchors. If Zenas is correct, then the current instability might represent not the death throes of the mortal plane, but its birth pangs as a more independent, self-sustaining reality. This transitional interpretation points to the increasing agency of mortal beings as a potential counterbalance to the erosion of the tower system. Throughout the history of Tamriel, mortals have demonstrated a remarkable capacity to to influence reality through various means, through magic, through technology, through the achievement of unusual metaphysical states, such as Chim, through the fulfillment of prophetic roles that reshape the course of history. As the rigid framework provided by the towers weakens, the fluid, creative potential of mortal agency may become increasingly significant in determining the nature and direction of reality. Evidence for this shift can be seen in the increasing frequency with which individual mortals achieve extraordinary metaphysical breakthroughs or fulfill cosmic roles. The emergence of figures like the Nirn, the champion of Cyrodiil, and the last dragonborn, mortals who reshape reality through their actions in ways previously reserved for divine beings, suggests a gradual transfer of metaphysical agency from rigid cosmic structures to flexible mortal consciousness. This transfer may represent the next stage in the evolution of the mortal plane, a transition from externally supported stability to internally generated dynamism. The political and cultural implications of this metaphysical shift are already becoming apparent across Tamriel. The Fourth Era has been characterized by a general decline in centralized institutions and traditional power structures, coupled with the emergence of more diverse, locally grounded forms of organization and identity. The imperial system that dominated much of the Third Era has fragmented. Ancient cultural distinctions have reasserted themselves. New forms of magic and spiritual practice have developed outside established traditions. These changes mirror at a social level what is occurring at a metaphysical level, a shift from rigid hierarchical structures to more fluid, distributed networks of influence and organization. As the tower system that provided a metaphysical framework for centralized power weakens, political and cultural expression naturally gravitates toward more diverse, adaptive forms. For some factions, however, the erosion of the tower system represents not an opportunity for positive transformation, but a catastrophe to be either accelerated or reversed. The most notorious of these is the Thalmor, the ruling faction of the Aldmeri Dominion, who, according to some sources, actively seek the destruction of the remaining towers as part of an agenda to unmake the mortal plane entirely. This extreme position derives from a particular interpretation of elven mythology, in which Lorkhan's creation of the mortal plane is viewed not as a positive innovation, but as a cruel trick that trapped divine spirits in limited mortal forms. By this understanding, the towers serve primarily to maintain the prison of mortality, and their destruction would lead to the liberation of the trapped spirits and a return to the pure, unlimited spiritual existence that preceded creation. A recovered fragment of what appears to be an internal Thalmor document expresses this perspective with chilling clarity. To kill man is to reach heaven from where we came before the doom. When we accomplish this, we can escape the mockery and long shame of the material prison. This passage suggests a direct connection between the Thalmor's military campaign against the human empires and their metaphysical agenda to dismantle the tower system, with both serving the ultimate goal of unmaking mortality itself. Whether such an outcome is actually possible, let alone desirable, remains a subject of intense debate among those aware of the metaphysical issues involved. What is certain is that the continuing erosion of the tower system has created opportunities for radical change, positive or negative, that would have been impossible in earlier eras, when reality was more firmly anchored and defined. More subtly, the erosion of the tower system may be contributing to a general awakening of metaphysical awareness among the population of Tamriel. As the rigid frameworks that defined and limited reality weaken, more individuals find themselves naturally sensitive to energies and patterns that were previously accessible only to those with specialized training or innate gifts. Dreams become more vivid and prophetic. Intuitive insights occur more frequently. The boundaries between conscious and unconscious awareness grow more permeable. Reports from various provinces describe ordinary citizens suddenly developing unusual abilities. Farmers who can sense weather patterns days in advance, children who can communicate with nature spirits without training, craftspeople who spontaneously discover new techniques that should be beyond their knowledge or skill. These phenomena may represent the early stages of a broader metaphysical awakening, as the dissolution of rigid cosmic structures allows for more direct connection between individual consciousness and the underlying patterns of reality. This awakening represents both opportunity and danger. On one hand, increased metaphysical sensitivity could lead to new forms of understanding and cooperation, as more individuals become aware of the underlying connections between all forms of existence. On the other hand, such sensitivity without proper context or training can lead to confusion, delusion, or manipulation by entities that seek to exploit this opening for their own purposes. The ultimate fate of the tower system and of Mundus itself remains uncertain. Much depends on whether the remaining towers can be maintained or restored, whether new towers might somehow be created to replace those that have fallen, and whether alternative sources of metaphysical stability might emerge to complement or replace the functions served by the traditional towers. What is clear is that the world of Tamriel stands at a crossroads, a moment of exceptional metaphysical potential, when the very nature of reality has become surprisingly fluid and responsive to intention. In such a moment, the choices made by individuals and groups, especially those with unusual metaphysical awareness or capability, take on cosmic significance. Whether this potential leads to catastrophe, renewal, or transformation depends largely on who recognizes the opportunity and how they choose to respond to it. As we contemplate these profound questions about the fate of the towers and the reality they sustain, let us turn our attention in the next chapter to some of the more esoteric aspects of tower lore, the mysterious concept of the tower as seen sideways, the relationship between towers and the achievement of Chim, and the deeper metaphysical principles that underlie the entire cosmic architecture of the Elder Scrolls universe. Chapter 4: Esoteric Tower Lore and the Ultimate Tower. As we approach the conclusion of our exploration of the towers, we must venture into more esoteric territory, the deeper metaphysical principles that underlie the tower system, and connect it to the most profound mysteries of the Elder Scrolls universe. Here, at the boundaries of conventional understanding, we encounter concepts that challenge not only our comprehension of the fictional cosmos, but our basic assumptions about reality, identity, and existence itself. Perhaps the most enigmatic concept in all of tower lore is the notion of the tower seen sideways. The idea that the entire system of towers, when perceived from a particular metaphysical angle, reveals itself not as multiple structures, but as a single, all-encompassing tower that transcends and contains all others. This concept appears in various esoteric texts, most notably in the obscure The Tower from the 36 Lessons of Vivek, which speaks of the secret tower that I am and describes it as the shape of the only name of God. The full passage reads, with deliberate mysticism, "The tower is an achievement that stands eternal, one that I have only begun to glimpse. To see the tower is to see the secret tower within, and within the secret tower is the name of God. This cryptic formulation has been the subject of intense debate among scholars of metaphysics, with interpretations ranging from the psychological to the cosmological, from the spiritual to the mathematical. To understand this cryptic formulation, we must first recall the geometric model that represents the metaphysical structure of the Elder Scrolls universe, the wheel. In this model, the mortal plane of Mundus forms the hub, the surrounding realms of Oblivion form the rim, and the towers serve as the spokes connecting hub to rim, maintaining the structural integrity of the whole. This wheel is not merely a conceptual model, but a genuine metaphysical architecture that determines how reality functions and persists. The mathematical precision of this arrangement is not coincidental. According to Ulf-Mary metaphysicians, the exact number and positioning of the towers creates a geometry of profound significance, a perfect balance of forces that allows the mortal plane to exist in stable equilibrium between the chaotic realms of Oblivion and the pure, unchanging perfection of Aetherius. This geometric precision reflects what the Dwemer called the tone patterns of creation, the mathematical relationships that underlie all manifestations of existence. The text suggests that when one achieves a particular state of metaphysical enlightenment, it becomes possible to perceive this wheel from a different angle, to see it edge-on rather than face-on. When viewed this way, the wheel ceases to appear as a wheel at all, and instead resembles a single tower. The tower, the ultimate metaphysical structure that transcends even the system of towers themselves. This perception represents the deepest possible insight into the nature of reality in the Elder Scrolls universe, revealing the underlying unity that gives rise to apparent multiplicity. An anonymous text recovered from the ruins of Kogarun, believed to be of Dagoth Ur's authorship, describes this perception. Shift your vision just so, and the wheel becomes a tower. Shift again, and the tower becomes an eye. Shift once more, and the eye becomes a door. Beyond this door lies what we have always been, and will always be. This progression of symbols, from wheel to tower to eye to door, suggests a sequence of deepening insight, each perspective revealing more fundamental aspects of reality's true nature. The scholar Vik, whose writings on this subject remain the primary source for these concepts, describes this perception as the secret that is within the tower. He suggests that to see the wheel as a tower is to recognize that all existence is ultimately a single, unified pattern, rather than a collection of separate elements, that distinctions between self and other, between mortal and divine, between Mundus and Oblivion, are convenient illusions rather than fundamental truths. This realization of underlying unity raises profound questions about the nature of identity and consciousness in the Elder Scrolls universe. If all apparently separate beings are ultimately aspects of a single pattern, then what is the status of individual consciousness? Is it merely an illusion, a temporary eddy in the universal flow of being, or does it retain some form of genuine reality and significance even within the context of ultimate unity? These questions lead us to what may be the most significant metaphysical concept in Elder Scrolls lore, Chim, a form of enlightenment in which one simultaneously recognizes the illusory nature of individual existence and yet maintains individual identity in the face of this recognition. Those who achieve Chim understand that all beings are fundamentally aspects of a single underlying reality, yet they refuse to surrender their individuality to this unity, creating a paradoxical state of being, both one with everything and distinct from it. In the words of the metaphysician Monkar Camoran, though his understanding was significantly distorted, Chiem, those who know it, can reshape the land. Witness the home of the Red King, once jungled. This cryptic reference points to one of the most famous examples of Chiem in action, Tiber Septim's transformation of Cyrodiil from dense jungle to temperate forest, not through conventional magic, but through the reality-altering potential of Chiem. The connection between the tower concept and Chiem becomes clearer when we consider the etymology of the term. In Ehel Norfex, the language believed to be spoken by the original spirits before the creation of Mundus, Chiem is associated with concepts of royalty, starlight, and high splendor, but its deeper meaning may be connected to the Dwemeri concept of the brass sound, the tone that reveals the underlying structure of reality, the sound one might hear when striking the tower itself, and causing it to resonate with its true nature. Ancient Dwemer texts recovered from Botaft speak of the harmonic tremors that reveal the structural nature of existence, and describe experiments designed to produce these harmonics through massive tuning forks and resonance chambers built at precise mathematical intervals. These experiments may have been early attempts to perceive the tower principle directly through acoustic means, to hear rather than see the fundamental patterns that underlie reality. Those who achieve Chiem gain the ability to perceive the tower directly, to see reality not as a collection of separate objects and beings, but as a single unified pattern temporarily expressing itself through apparent multiplicity. This perception grants extraordinary power, as one who understands the underlying unity of all things can manipulate that pattern from within, reshaping reality according to their vision while remaining part of it. The path to Chiem is perilous, however, as it requires navigating what some texts call the hurling disk, the moment of realizing one's illusory nature without losing the sense of individual identity. Many who approach this realization apparently experience a form of metaphysical dissolution called zero-summing, in which the recognition of one's illusory nature leads to immediate non-existence. As the Dwemer scholar Baladus Demnavani puts it in his fragmentary notes on ascension mechanics, to see the truth and maintain the lie requires a will of extraordinary fortitude. Most who glimpse the former immediately lose grip on the latter. The most famous examples of individuals who achieved Chiem in elderscrollslore are Vivek, the warrior poet god of the tribunal, and Tiber Septim, who became the god Talos after his death. Both demonstrated reality-altering capabilities that transcended conventional magic or political power. Vivek could stop the moon Bardar in mid-fall and hold it suspended above his city for centuries. Tiber Septim could transform the landscape of Cyrodiil from dense jungle to temperate forest simply by envisioning it differently. These feats illustrate the profound connection between the tower concept and the metaphysical potential of consciousness itself. In a sense, those who achieve Chiem become living towers, points where the fundamental pattern of reality becomes conscious of itself and capable of self-modification. They embody the same principle that the physical towers represent in material form, the anchoring of potential into specific intentional patterns. The paradoxical nature of Chiem, being both individual and universal simultaneously, mirrors a fundamental paradox in the tower principle itself. Each tower is simultaneously a unique structure with specific properties and an expression of the single universal tower principle. This paradox of unity in multiplicity and multiplicity in unity lies at the heart of the most profound metaphysical insights in elderscrollslore, suggesting that reality itself operates according to principles that transcend conventional logic and require a more nuanced both and form of understanding. But Chi represents only one approach to the ultimate mystery of the tower. Another path is described in certain texts as the walking way of the Psijic endeavor, a more gradual and communal approach to metaphysical transcendence that seeks not individual enlightenment but collective transformation, where Chi involves maintaining individuality in the face of cosmic unity. The Psijic endeavor seeks to align individual consciousness with universal patterns, creating harmony rather than asserting distinction. The Psijic order, for which this approach is named, has maintained a presence on the Isle of Artaeum for thousands of years, studying reality through meditation, contemplation, and the cultivation of what they call the old ways. Unlike conventional mages who manipulate reality through formulaic spells and rituals, the Psijics seek to understand and work with the underlying patterns of existence directly, achieving results through alignment rather than imposition. The foundational text of the Psijic order, the Old Ways, describes their approach in terms remarkably similar to various mystical traditions in our own world. The Psijic order teaches that different but equal truths may inhabit the same space, and that the seemingly contradictory nature of such arrangements is only contradictory from the perspective of limited consciousness. This acceptance of paradox and appreciation for multiple simultaneous truths characterizes the Psijic approach to the Tower mysteries. Their approach to the Tower concept emphasizes its role as a symbol of connecting principles, the vertical line that joins heaven and earth, spiritual and material, potential and actual. For the Psijics, the ultimate tower is not something to be perceived or conquered, but something to be embodied, a way of existing that bridges different levels of reality and allows for the harmonious integration of seemingly opposing principles. The Psijic practices for cultivating this form of awareness include various forms of meditation, the study of temporal manipulation, the development of telepathic communication, and engagement with what they call the ethos stream, the underlying current of meaning that flows through all events and experiences. Through these practices, they seek not to impose their will upon reality, but to align themselves with its deepest patterns, becoming vessels through which these patterns can express themselves with minimal distortion. A third approach to the Tower mystery appears in the teachings of the mysterious moth priests, who study the elderscrolls themselves, artifacts that exist partially outside conventional reality and contain knowledge of all possible pasts and futures. The moth priests suggest that the scrolls are themselves fragments or reflections of the ultimate tower, pieces of the fundamental pattern that underlies all existence made temporarily perceptible to mortal consciousness. In the rare text Ruminations on the Elder Scrolls, the moth priest Septimus Cygnus describes the scrolls as fragments of creation's blueprint, suggesting that they contain the original patterns from which reality itself was constructed. He further speculates that to read the scrolls is to glimpse the mind of the divine, indicating that the knowledge contained within them transcends what would normally be accessible to mortal consciousness. Through their disciplined study of the scrolls, the moth priests seek a form of enlightenment distinct from both Chime and the Psijic endeavor, where Chime involves recognizing the illusory nature of distinction while maintaining individual identity, and the Psijic endeavor seeks alignment with cosmic patterns. The moth priests pursue a form of self-dissolution in which individual consciousness merges with the patterns revealed in the scrolls, achieving insight through surrender rather than assertion or alignment. The methodology of the moth priests includes elaborate rituals involving the ancestor moths, which are believed to serve as intermediaries between mortal perception and cosmic patterns. As described in Effects of the Elder Scrolls, these moths create a conduit through which the cosmic memory can flow into the reader's mind without destroying it. This protective function allows for a controlled form of self-dissolution, a temporary surrender of individual perspective that stops short of complete metaphysical dissolution. The gradual blindness that afflicts moth priests as they study the scrolls represents the sacrifice of conventional perception in exchange for deeper vision, the surrender of the limited perspective of individual consciousness for the more comprehensive but less distinct awareness of cosmic patterns. In this sense, the moth priests embody yet another aspect of the Tower principle, the sacrificial foundation upon which transcendent awareness is built. Former moth priest Keir Solari, in his controversial Confessions of a Scroll Reader, describes his experience as my physical sight dimmed, my inner vision clarified. The patterns became increasingly apparent, not just of events and their connections, but of the underlying principles that give rise to all possible events. I began to perceive not just what had happened or would happen, but the why behind the what, the essential nature that makes all occurrences possible. These diverse approaches to the ultimate mystery of the Tower, Chiem, the Psijic endeavor, and the path of the moth priests, illustrate the multifaceted nature of metaphysical enlightenment in the Elder Scrolls universe. There is no single definitive way to approach the deepest truths of existence, but rather multiple paths that reflect different aspects of a complex, paradoxical reality. The physical towers scattered across Tamriel mirror this diversity, each embodying a different approach to the fundamental challenge of giving form to potential, of anchoring abstract principles in concrete manifestations. Ada-Mantia represents stability and the establishment of linear time. Crystal-like lore embodies perfection and the connection between different planes of existence. Red Mountain expresses the creative potential inherent in destruction and sacrifice. White Gold Tower manifests the integration of different forms of magical energy. Yet beyond their specific differences, all towers share certain fundamental characteristics that reflect the essential nature of the Tower principle itself. All serve as points of connection between different levels of reality. All anchor abstract patterns in concrete form. All maintain stability while allowing for transformation. All embody sacrificial foundations that support ongoing creation. These shared qualities suggest that beneath their apparent diversity lies a common essence, the Tower principle that manifests in various forms while remaining fundamentally unified. This diversity of expression reflects what may be the most profound implication of Tower lore, that reality itself is not a fixed, predetermined structure, but a creative collaboration between different forms of consciousness, each contributing its unique perspective to the ongoing development of existence. The towers in this view represent not impositions of order upon chaos, but invitations to participate in the shaping of reality according to diverse visions and values. The scholar Buridamo of First Hold captures this collaborative view in his meditations on the diverse. The towers do not dictate reality, but propose it. Each represents a different answer to the fundamental question of existence. What forms shall potential assume? Together, they create not a rigid framework, but a conversation, a dance of perspectives that collectively sustain the wonder we call existence. The concept of reality as collaborative creation appears most explicitly in what some esoteric texts call the provisional house, the temporary structure of consensus reality that allows for meaningful interaction between different forms of consciousness. This provisional nature of existence explains why the towers can both maintain reality and allow for its transformation, providing sufficient stability for experience to be coherent while permitting sufficient flexibility for growth and evolution to occur. The metaphor of the house is particularly significant as it suggests both shelter and limitation, both protection and constraint. Like a physical house, the provisional structure of reality creates a space within which certain kinds of experience become possible, while others are excluded. The towers serve as the pillars of this house, maintaining its structural integrity while defining its basic architecture. If we follow this line of thinking to its logical conclusion, we arrive at perhaps the most radical implication of tower lore, that the ultimate tower is not a structure or principle external to consciousness, but consciousness itself, the awareness that perceives patterns, recognizes relationships, and creates meaning from the raw material of experience. In this sense, every conscious being is a potential tower, a point where the abstract patterns of possibility can be anchored into specific forms through attention, intention, and action. This recognition of the tower-like nature of consciousness may explain why the erosion of the physical tower system, while concerning from a conventional perspective, need not lead inevitably to the dissolution of reality itself. As the external anchors weaken, the internal anchors of conscious intention and meaning-making may become increasingly significant, shifting the burden of reality maintenance from physical structures to the consciousness that perceives and engages with those structures. The Dwemer scholar Inchunak hints at this possibility in his Inchunak's Fire and Faith, where he writes, "When the spokes are removed, the wheel continues to turn upon the axle of awareness itself." This cryptic statement suggests that consciousness may serve as the ultimate foundation of reality, capable of maintaining coherence even as the physical structures that formerly supported it fail or disappear. The mage scholar Devaith Far expressed this possibility more explicitly in his controversial text, Beyond Towers, Consciousness as Anchor, in which he proposed that the final evolution of the mortal plane may involve the transfer of stabilizing function from external constructs to internal awareness, from the tower without to the tower within. This prophetic vision suggests that the current instability in the tower system may represent not the end of reality, but its maturation, a transition from externally supported stability to internally generated coherence. In practical terms, this transition might manifest as an increasing responsiveness of reality to conscious intention, a greater fluidity in the relationship between thought and manifestation, a blurring of the boundaries between subject and object. These characteristics, already emerging in various parts of Tamriel as the tower system weakens, represent not the chaotic dissolution of reality, but its evolution toward a more dynamic, participatory form, one in which consciousness plays a more active role in determining the nature of existence. This transition, if it indeed occurs, would represent the fulfillment of what some interpret as Lorkhan's original vision for the mortal plane, a realm where consciousness could evolve through limitation and challenge to achieve forms of awareness and creativity impossible in the undifferentiated eternity that preceded creation. By this understanding, the tower system was never intended to be permanent, but rather to serve as temporary scaffolding until the consciousness inhabiting the mortal plane developed sufficient strength and coherence to sustain reality through its own internal resources. The implications of this possibility extend beyond the metaphysical to the ethical and spiritual. If consciousness itself serves as the ultimate tower, then the quality of that consciousness, its clarity, compassion, insight, and integrity becomes crucial to the stability and character of reality itself. How we think, feel, and act shapes not only our individual experience, but the collective patterns that define existence for all beings. This understanding appears in various forms across the spiritual traditions of Tamriel, from the psychic emphasis on mindful presence to the Nord concept of holding the world together with stories, from the Redguard practice of sword-singing reality into preferred forms to the Khajiit tradition of dancing new patterns into being. Beneath their cultural differences, these diverse approaches share a common recognition that consciousness participates actively in the creation and maintenance of reality, rather than merely observing it passively. The Khajiit moon singer Ubrazdar captured this participatory view in a poem that has been preserved in various forms throughout elsewhere. With each thought, you build a tower. With each word, you shape a stone. With each deed, you anchor heaven to earth. Walk in awareness for your steps. Create the path others will follow. This simple verse encapsulates the ethics of tower consciousness, the recognition that each being serves as a point where potential becomes actual, where the abstract becomes concrete, where the universal expresses itself through the particular. As the physical tower system continues to erode, this participatory aspect of consciousness may become increasingly significant. Without the rigid framework provided by the traditional towers, reality may become more responsive to intention, imagination, and belief, more malleable to the creative power of consciousness itself. This increased fluidity creates both opportunities for positive transformation and risks of chaotic dissolution, depending on how this newfound creative power is understood and directed. The esoteric traditions that study the tower principle suggest that the key to navigating this transition lies in developing what they call tower consciousness, an awareness that recognizes its own creative power while remaining grounded in responsibility, compassion, and understanding of the interconnected nature of all beings. This form of consciousness neither imposes its will arbitrarily nor surrenders to passive acceptance, but engages creatively with the patterns of existence, contributing to their evolution while respecting their inherent integrity. Cultivating such consciousness involves practices that might be familiar to students of various spiritual traditions in our own world. Mindful awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, and sensory experience. Contemplation of one's interconnection with other beings and the environment. Development of compassion and ethical sensitivity. Exploration of the nature of identity and its boundaries, and engagement with creative expression as a means of exploring and expanding one's relationship with reality. The ancient Aldmeri text, The Egg of Time, describes the cultivation of tower consciousness in terms of standing at the center of all possibilities while choosing with wisdom which shall manifest. This image of conscious choice amidst infinite potential captures the essence of what it means to serve as a living tower, to function as a point where the abstract patterns of possibility converge into the specific forms of manifestation, guided by wisdom, compassion, and understanding rather than by fear, desire, or unconscious habit. Through such practices, the esoteric traditions suggest one can begin to recognize and embody the tower principle in one's own awareness, to serve as a conscious bridge between potential and actuality. between the infinite possibilities of what might be and the specific manifestations of what is. This bridging function mirrors on a personal scale what the physical towers perform on a cosmic scale, anchoring abstract patterns into concrete forms while maintaining the connection between them. The ultimate significance of the tower principle may lie in this recognition of the profound resonance between cosmic architecture and individual consciousness, between the structures that maintain reality on the grandest scale and the awareness that perceives and participates in that reality moment by moment. In this resonance, we glimpse what may be the deepest mystery of the Elder Scrolls universe, that the macrocosm and the microcosm reflect each other, that the patterns that shape galaxies also shape thoughts, that each conscious being contains within itself the entire cosmos in miniature. As we conclude our exploration of the Tower Principle, we might reflect on how this esoteric concept from the Elder Scrolls universe resonates with our own experience of consciousness and reality. While the specific metaphysics of towers, stones, and chim belong to a fictional cosmos, the underlying themes, the relationship between potential and actuality, between unity and multiplicity, between stability and transformation, touch on questions that have engaged philosophers, mystics, and seekers throughout human history. Perhaps the most valuable insight we can draw from tower lore is the recognition of our own participatory role in the creation and maintenance of meaning, value, and coherent experience. Whether or not we accept the metaphysical propositions of the Elder Scrolls universe, we can appreciate the invitation to become more conscious of how our attention, intention, and action shape the reality we experience and share with others. Like the ancient structures that anchor reality in Tamriel, we too can serve as points where potential becomes actual, where abstract principles find concrete expression, where the infinite possibilities of what might be converge into the specific manifestations of what is. In our own way, through our consciousness and creative engagement with life, each of us can embody the Tower Principle, bridging heaven and earth, connecting the ideal and the real, anchoring meaning in a world of flux and change. As we bring this journey through the metaphysics of the Elder Scrolls to a close, let us carry with us this sense of the tower not merely as an external structure to be studied or a metaphysical principle to be contemplated, but as a quality of awareness to be cultivated and expressed through our engagement with the world. For in the end, the most significant towers may be not those built of stone and magic, but those created through conscious presence, compassionate action, and creative participation in the unfolding patterns of existence. As our journey through the metaphysical architecture of Tamriel comes to a close, we find ourselves looking at the world of the Elder Scrolls with new eyes. What once might have seemed mere landmarks on a fantasy landscape, a tower here, a mountain there, now reveal themselves as the very pillars that maintain reality itself, each embodying different principles, different visions of what existence might be. We have explored Ada-Mantia, the first tower, spontaneously arising from the convention that established time itself. We have contemplated crystal-like lore, with its multi-dimensional stone connecting different planes of existence. We have considered the raw creative power of Red Mountain and the Heart of Lorkhan, the sophisticated magical engineering of White Gold Tower, the natural majesty of Snowthroat, the distributed network of Green Sap, and the revolutionary ambition of Walkbrass. We have witnessed how the gradual deactivation of these towers has created increasing instability across Tamriel, opening possibilities for both catastrophe and transformation. And we have ventured into the most esoteric aspects of tower lore, the concept of seeing the wheel as a tower, the relationship between tower perception and chim, the possibility that consciousness itself might serve as the ultimate tower. Throughout this exploration, we have encountered a vision of reality that is both structured and flexible, both enduring and evolving, both unified and diverse. The towers do not impose a rigid framework upon existence, but rather anchor specific patterns within an infinite field of possibility, creating sufficient stability for meaningful experience while allowing for growth, change, and creative development. Perhaps the most profound insight from our journey is the recognition that each conscious being serves as a miniature tower, a point where abstract potential becomes concrete manifestation, where the universal expresses itself through the particular, where meaning takes form in a world of flux and change. Through our attention, intention, and action, we participate in the ongoing creation and maintenance of reality, contributing our unique perspective to the collective tapestry of existence. As you rest now, perhaps drifting towards sleep, consider the tower-like nature of your own consciousness, how it bridges different levels of awareness, how it anchors abstract ideas in concrete experience, how it serves as a meeting point between universal patterns and individual expression. Like the great metaphysical structures we have explored, your awareness creates a space where potential becomes actual, where the infinite diversity of possibility converges into the specific forms of your unique life and perspective. In our next episode, Children of the Stars, we will explore the ancient history and diverse cultures of the elven races, the Altmer, Dunmer, Bosmer, Falmer, and Orsimer. We will discover how these different branches of elvenkind emerged from their common Oldmurry roots, how they developed their distinctive philosophies and ways of life, and how their long histories continue to shape the political and cultural landscape of Tamriel. Until then, may your dreams be peaceful, filled with images of soaring towers and ancient stones humming with power beyond mortal comprehension. May you rest as securely as reality itself, anchored by the metaphysical architecture we have explored together, and may you awaken with renewed appreciation for your own role in maintaining and creating the patterns of meaning that define your experience. Thank you for journeying with me through these cosmic mysteries. Sleep well, traveler, and remember that in your own way, through your consciousness and creative engagement with life, you too embody the Tower Principle, bridging heaven and earth, connecting the ideal and the real, anchoring meaning in a world of endless possibility.